I am looking at September FTSE upgrade, EM status. Is this significant at all in your mind? Is it making you think differently about Vietnam? Do you think MSCI is a bigger deal? And I suppose in terms of indexes like these, do you really care about them at all? I mean, from a practical day-to-day basis, how you manage money, are they important? And do you think FTSE is important in September?
But if you talk about the MSCI, I think that's the game changer for me. Game changer. It's like Vietnam go to the World Cup, and it's a big step because before you will step into the MSCI emerging market, it's a lot to be done. CCP, accessibility to the foreign room, and another things to be done.
And do you think the FTSE upgrade has signaled some improvements or to the practical process of investing in Vietnam? So two different angles there. Has governance improved? Has risk? Maybe governance has improved and risk has gone up. I don't know, but what do you think?
Corporate governance issue is something I'm really very interested or extremely care a lot about nowadays, especially in the Asian markets context. So versus developed markets, in Asian markets, I feel like corporate governance issue is something that people sort of do not pay enough attention, but it is actually one of the things that is significant. So in Vietnam itself, I'm pretty neutral about it. I don't think the investment risk has increased or reduced in respect with corporate governance issue per se. And the FTSE upgrading is inviting more institutional or foreign institutional participation into the market. And I think this is the first step whereby corporate governance issue or more voices from professional institutional investors will be raised and heard by the management. And hopefully with that, more reforms in terms of corporate governance would then be carried out.
How do you feel that? Do you not feel that? Is that something that is now real? We've got a pipeline of IPOs started, which hadn't happened for 3 or 4 years. Is that rising of the capital markets and the shift in the capital markets going to change the ecosystem? Are PE firms still just selling between themselves in a way? I've sold and it's basically just swapping assets. Is PE real? Is it back in Vietnam? Sorry.
Yeah, so certainly the private equity market has slowed down substantially compared to, say, 5 years ago. I think back then we used to see transactions in a couple $100 million, right? But rarely we see those these days. I don't think that is a problem that is specific to Vietnam, though. I think it's an emerging market sort of problems because global capital has becoming a lot more selective with investments, and we're seeing capital outflow into the US, Japan, Australia, right? I think Vietnam still have a lot to offer among other Southeast Asia countries. I think the demographic trend is there, GDP growth is there, and very importantly, reform-oriented government, which is rare if you look at other regional countries, right?
I'm going to ask you to comment on that and see what you think, and because you're one of those local institutions that provides liquidity in the market, etc., etc. And then I'll ask you another question.
Vietnam's market has had an issue, and most recently we've had our own crowding out effect. And I'm not going to name specific conglomerates or names here, but that outperformance from a very small group of companies has crowded out the rest. And what we think is there's got to be a structural reform in this market, in that you've got to move away from being dependent on retail investors. To pick up a comment that Hannah and Lap have said, we've got to move towards institutional money, superannuation, wealth managers, asset managers, institutional managers in this market. Why? Because we're long-term, right? And today, right, if you think about liquidity, yesterday, lowest liquidity, if you exclude that one-off transaction, that swap, lowest liquidity in the market we've seen in a year. and persistently in the last few trading sessions, incredibly low participation, meaning that retail investors are probably not that interested, and now we're beholden to their behavior. So what we need is perhaps with the FTSE upgrade, it is a sort of a lightning rod, a catalyst that reform needs to take place across the border.